if you look at those, let's say, four key prongs of Biden's foreign policy, Ukraine, Israel, Yemen, and China, the establishment wing of the Republican Party, the dominant wing of the Republican Party represented in the presidential race by Nikki Haley and in the Congress and the Senate by people like Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio and Tom Cotton, are fully on board with all of those policies. The policy toward China has been to militarily encircle it, to put bases in places like South Korea and Japan and the Philippines and off various islands to essentially militarily encircle the Chinese. Biden was the first president in decades to explicitly state the U.S. would go to war with China in order to defend Taiwan. And almost all of these foreign policy prongs, the core ones that define the Biden approach to the world, have received applause from the vast majority of the Republican Party, which supported the war in Ukraine, which obviously supports the U.S. Paying for and arming of Israel, which supports the bombing of Yemen, and which supports an antagonistic and aggressive posture toward China. Here is Ben Shapiro, yesterday, just as one example, who spent 15 minutes or so on his program justifying and cheerleading the decision of the Biden administration to bomb Yemen, not just the act of bombing Yemen, but the rationale for it. Now, obviously, Ben Shapiro is somewhat of a special case because he is somebody who has long wanted the American armed forces to be used to fight against Israel's enemies. It's something that is a very consistent part of his worldview, but it's not like he's aberrational in that regard. There are a lot of people who believe that the United States should devote everything it can, its resources, its bombs, its military, to seeing the world through the eyes of Israel, to see Israel's enemies as the United States' enemies. And so obviously with the Houthis saying, we're against the destruction of Gaza, we're taking retaliation against Israeli ships and American ships, Ben Shapiro's thrilled that there are now combat troops of the United States Armed Forces now actively fighting in the Middle East against one of Israel's enemies. Not just the Houthis, but in Ben Shapiro's eyes, an arm of Iran, the ultimate enemy of Israel that neocons and warmongers have long wanted the United States to fight. Remember, at the start of the war in Israel, people like Lindsey Graham and Nikki Haley were saying, let's bomb Iran. Lindsey Graham recently said, let's bomb Iran off the map. And so this obsession with going to war with Iran has long been a centerpiece of traditional Republican, Bush Cheney, kind of Mitt Romney foreign policy that would fit perfectly comfortably into the GOP establishment prior to Trump, which they're eager to bring back. So here's Ben Shapiro. I think it's worth going through a few excerpts of what he said, again, in defense of the Biden administration's decision to launch a new war against one of Israel's enemies.
So last night, CENTCOM, as well as a bunch of other foreign countries, part of an American alliance, struck at targets in Yemen. They struck the Houthis. The Houthis are a ragtag group of terrorists who have taken over a large swath of Yemen after a massive civil war between the Houthis and the Saudis over control of the country. The Iranians have been funding the Houthis for years and years and years. And we'll get into the history of what exactly happened with the Houthis. Suffice it to say, the reason that all of this is happening right now is because the Houthis decided that they were going to try to act as an Iranian proxy arm and generate support for Iran by attacking Israel and then by more largely attacking shipping in the Red Sea. Now, shooting off a few rockets or missiles at Israel that get down by American ships or by the Saudis, that really didn't have much of an impact on world opinion or on the world at large. But attacking ships in the Red Sea absolutely does.
Okay, he's exactly right. He's seeing the world through the Israeli perspective. He's saying the motive of the Yemenis is to strike back at Israel as punishment for what they're doing in Gaza. So the question yet again becomes, how is that an American war? The Yemenis haven't killed anybody. They haven't sunk any American ships. They have been trying to impede the flow of commercial travel through the Red Sea by some countries that they perceive as being responsible for the Israeli war in Gaza. But why does this mean that the United States now has to go to war because the Houthis are angry about what the Israelis are doing? This is something we talked about from the start, that the cost that the United States was incurring in order to defend this foreign country yet again is not just measured in the billions of dollars that we're going to spend to transfer to the Israelis, nor in the already depleted stockpiles we're going to use to transfer the weapons to them that they're using, as everyone knows, to destroy Yemen. Whenever there's a video of babies that are killed or children being operated on without anesthesia, broadcast to the entire world, everybody knows that it was American weapons that did that, and that bears a real cost. But the biggest cost is the danger that we're going to now have the Ben Shapiros of the world demanding, and now getting, and now celebrating the deployment of American troops in an actual fighting war, in a shooting war, against other Israeli enemies in the Middle East. That's what we have, and that explanation of his makes clear that that is actually the dynamic that he is happy about. Let's watch a couple other excerpts.
The prior year. Well, all of this drove last night an allied attack on certain resources in Yemen controlled by the Houthis. It was a telegraphed punch, meaning this entire exercise was designed to deter the Houthis, not designed to actually kill or destabilize the Houthis, who in fact, as we say, are a terrorist group that governs a large swath of part of Yemen. The reason to telegraph the attack is to allow Iranians to get their military forces out of the way so as not to provoke some sort of escalation with Iran more directly, because, of course, Iran has lots of forces on the ground helping out the Houthis in Yemen.
Now, obviously, needless to say, anybody who dislikes Israel or who fights against Israel is a terrorist. That's pretty much the definition at this point. Any group that defies the orders of the United States or Israel is a terrorist organization. And even though the Houthis are now running and governing Yemen, Ben Shapiro wants to call them a terrorist organization. But as he just said, it was a campaign that we had telegraphed for many weeks. It was something that was very well planned. Everybody knew it was coming. And that begs the question that we raised in the first segment of why the Biden administration could not simply have gone to Congress to debate whether or not it was time to go start a new war, risk a new war, in order to fight against one of Israel's enemies in the Middle East. It should have been openly debated and then voted on in Congress for exactly the reason Ben Shapiro just said. There was no emergency there. It didn't pop out of nowhere. The opposite was true. It was very deliberate, and we had weeks to plan it and threaten it, which means we had ample time to have gone to Congress to debate it and to seek its authorization.
A blow. The Houthis, of course, say they're not going to be deterred because the way this works in the Middle East is that you have basically terrorist groups that provoke a response from an overwhelming power. They get their asses absolutely kicked, and then they claim that just because they survived, they won. That's what's currently going on in the Gaza Strip. Hamas provokes a gigantic Israeli military response, the largest Israeli military response to any attack since 1973. And they get their asses absolutely handed to them, and most of their fighters killed, and most of their leadership killed. And then, if they are breathing at the end of it, they claim victory. The Houthis are playing the same game. It's really, honestly, cowardly sort of stuff. Nasser al-Din Amir, a Houthi...
It's cowardly stuff. He's sitting in the studio making millions of dollars a year, maybe millions of dollars a month, to cheer the deployment of American troops in that region to defend this foreign country that he acknowledges he has a great deal of loyalty to and love for. The Houthis are confronting the most powerful military in the world and are saying they're going to continue to do it because of the cause that they believe in, which is trying to impose some cost on Israel and the United States for killing an enormous number of civilians in Gaza and destroying civilian Palestinian life. Now, whatever else you want to say about the Houthis, what they are doing is not cowardly. Cowardly is sitting in a studio sending other people to war for your pleasure or for your agenda. That's cowardly. Spending your whole life demanding more and more wars that you and your family never go fight. That's cowardly. Cowardly is not what the Houthis are doing, whatever else you might want to think about them.
The official told the Wall Street Journal, this is a brutal aggression. I love this. It's a brutal aggression. Din Amir, a Houthi official, told the Wall Street Journal, this is a brutal aggression. I love this. It's a brutal aggression. Honest to God. If America and its allies wanted to commit, quote unquote, brutal aggression against the Houthis, this guy would not be alive to talk about it. Say they will undoubtedly pay its price. We will not waver in our stance to support the Palestinian people, regardless of the cost. After the coalition strikes, the U.S. had not seen any direct retaliatory action directed toward U.S. or other coalition members in the Red Sea. And again, the strikes came with a lot of warning. 1 week ago, the U.S., Britain, key allies issued an ultimatum saying stop it, and then they didn't stop it. And then on New Year's Day, Biden convened his national security team to discuss the options. And then, despite the coalition warning, the Houthis fired an anti-ship ballistic missile that fell into the water within sight of a commercial vessel. Now, the Houthis knew that the United States and its allies were going to strike all of these targets, and so they had relocated some of their weapons and equipment and fortified others. The question is whether this is going to deter further action from the Houthis. The answer is probably not. When you telegraph punches like this, it is very unlikely that that is going to convince the Houthis to stop what they are doing.
No, I agree with him there too. This is very unlikely to be the end of this escalation. This war is likely to go on, which means we have a new Middle East war. The question is for how long it will go on, for how many more exchanges of violence will it entail, how many people will be killed, how much retaliation will there be. Ben Shapiro seems extremely unbothered by those questions. Ones that should have been debated in Congress that we should still be debating now, because what he wants is what he has. That's why he's so happy. Namely, the exploitation of the most powerful military in the world in defense of this foreign country and its deployment against its enemies. But if you're somebody looking at it from an American perspective, those are to be of great concern to you. He's saying this is almost certainly not the end of it, just the beginning. Which means we've now bought ourselves another Middle East war of exactly the kind that Joe Biden, when running, said he would not give the United States because nobody else wants these Middle East wars. Let's look at the last excerpt before we go to freezing cold, devastatingly cold Iowa and speak to Michael Tracy, who we sent there.
Supply chain prices. And so it's very important that the West did something about this, just on a practical level. Now, on the moral level, the Houthis are some of the worst people on planet Earth. A legitimately evil, awful group. So the Houthis are an Iranian proxy group. Iran, as we've explained, is a terror sponsor. It has its tentacles all over the Middle East. It has its tentacles in Iraq, obviously, where they've had significant...
I have to laugh so much. I mean, I really laugh. Like, I find it darkly funny when people like Ben Shapiro complain, in general, that Iran has all of its tentacles in the Middle East. Nobody has more tentacles in the Middle East than the United States. At least Iran actually is in that region. The United States is on the opposite side of the world. The United States has not just tentacles, but military bases and control over multiple Arab states. We fund these Arab dictators, like the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Egyptians and the Jordanians and the Qataris, in order to do our bidding. And we're actually there fighting as usual. You have to go back to the 1970s to find a decade in which the United States did not bomb Iraq, just Iraq. And you notice there that Ben Shapiro is complaining that the Iranians have their tentacles in Iraq, a country that he cheered on as the United States went and packed up its military over across the world to invade and then occupy it for the next 15 years. But those kind of hypocrisies, those kinds of discrepancies don't enter his mind because he's looking at the world from a very self-centered, self-interested perspective. Secondarily, the American perspective, primarily the Israeli perspective. And so if you look at it from those interests in that order, then you're going to see the American involvement and control of the Middle East as something that we need more of. Whereas somehow it makes the Iranians the most evil people in the world, that they're trying to exert influence, counter-influence in their region.
Significant impact on the government of Iraq. They have their tentacles in Syria, where they're allied with Bashar Assad. They have their tentacles in Lebanon, where they effectively control the government via Hezbollah. They have their tentacles in Hamas. They have their tentacles in Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And they have their tentacles with the Houthis. Those tentacles are all over the Middle East. Now, one of the big problems that Iran historically has had is that Iran is Shia, and a huge percentage of the Middle East is Sunni. And because of that, there is not a lot of solidarity between the Shia and the Sunni. I mean, the reality is that whatever the hatred is for the Jewish state in the Middle East, the hatred for Israel, that's mostly a sideshow between the ongoing wars that have been happening between Shia and Sunni over the course of the past several decades. A multiple more Arabs and Persians have been killed in a variety of wars since the 1980s than anything that's happened with regard to the Jews. And all the hatred of the Jews does is it allows for the possibility of some sort of cross-cultural communication between Shia and Sunni in the Middle East. And that's what the Houthis are trying to do right now. They're trying to rally support to the Iranian side in any sort of Shia-Sunni conflict by siding with the Palestinians. Because one of the things that's happened is that the Palestinians, being an incredibly radicalized population that literally no Arab state will take in, not only will no Arab state take in the Palestinians, Arab states have expelled the Palestinians before. In the aftermath of the Gulf War, 200 to 300,000 Palestinians were expelled from Kuwait because they sided with Saddam Hussein in his war against Kuwait in the first Gulf War. So none of the Arab states are interested in taking in the Palestinian population. And so the Hamasniks went over to Iran and they worked a deal where Iran became one of their chief suppliers. And it turns out that the Sunni states, they have no interest in working with the Palestinians. Again, very radicalized population that destabilized virtually every regime they've come into contact with. By the way, this is why you're seeing Jordan right now issuing these very loud statements, because they are deeply afraid of their own population. 70% of Jordan is Palestinian, and they are afraid.
So let me just say two things here before we listen to this last part, which is, first of all, I hear this claim now all the time. And it's supposed to make you think that the Palestinians are subhuman and undesirable, that even Arab states don't want to take in the Palestinians. Now, first of all, one of the reasons why states like Egypt don't want to take in the Palestinians is because they don't want to help Israel in what is their stated goal in this war, which is to ethnically cleanse Gaza by transferring all of the Arabs and Palestinians out of there by putting them into other countries and then taking control of Gaza. But the other part of it is that when he says Arab countries don't want this, what he means are Arab dictators, U.S.-supported, U.S.-implemented Arab dictators who are there precisely to suppress the actual sentiments of the population. Like he just said, 70% or 80% of Jordanians want their government not to be an American puppet, but want them to be on the side of Palestine, because there's a huge Palestinian portion of Jordan, of the Jordanian population, who is Palestinian. That's why we have a king, a ruling family that we protect and pay for to keep that population's sentiments from being expressed. Same as in Egypt, same as in Saudi Arabia. So when they say, oh, even Arab states, what they mean are even the dictators that we control. But the most offensive part of this idea that, oh, well, obviously the Palestinians are bad people because no one wants to take them as refugees, is that after World War II, there were millions of Jewish refugees who survived the Holocaust in Europe. And no country wanted to take them. There were ships that came to the United States that FDR turned away during the war. And a lot of them ended up having to go back to Europe and dying as a result. The US wouldn't take any Jewish refugees. And then after the war, the European Jews stayed for at least 2 years in horrific refugee camps that a lot of them said were as bad as the concentration camps from which they were liberated, except for the fact that they just didn't get killed. But other than that, it was the same kind of treatment. They were in fenced-in conditions that were horrible in nature because no state would take would take European Jews as refugees. So if the fact that no Arab state wants to take in Palestinians as refugees tells us something about the character of the Palestinians, which is the point of this argument, to make you think that, what did it say about the character of Jews and European Jews that no one wanted to take them, if you apply that same reasoning? The reason people don't want to take refugees is the same reason we're having such a fervent debate in this country about trying to close our borders, and why so many people in Europe are so angry about taking refugees, including in Ireland, for example, where they're furious about the number of Ukrainian refugees they had to take in. Because it becomes a burden on the population. People don't want refugees in their country. But let's listen to this last part, because this really gives away the game of how Ben Shapiro and his comrades are actually looking at this conflict and the reason they want the American military so involved. Listen to this.
That their kingdom will be overthrown. This would not be the first time they had feared this. Obviously, in the early 1970s, Jordan expelled tens of thousands of Palestinians because of threats of overthrowing the regime in what was called Black September. So the basic idea here is that if you are Iran and you are seeking to buy legitimacy with the Arab street, you polarize the region around the Palestinians. Because what you say is, look at all these Arab states. They want to make peace with Israel so they can side against us. But the real enemy is the Juden. The real enemy is the Jews. And if we all remember that, then maybe we won't have any Abraham Accords. And Iran, of course, hates the Abraham Accords because it makes them a more minor player in the Middle East. It creates an overwhelming coalition of force that exists around its borders. That's the whole purpose of the Hamas attack. It's why the Yemeni Houthis are now involved in a fight that really has nothing to do with them. Because, again, this is all being directed from above by Iran.
Now, in all of that, do you hear anything about the interests of the American people, the lives of the American people? The irony is that the U.S. is actually helping Iran, if that's really their goal, uniting the Middle East in defense of the Palestinians and against Israel. But if you listen to Ben Shapiro talk about why this conflict is so important to him, why he's obsessed with the Middle East, he's not very subtle about what his priorities are. And they really do not have anything to do with the interests of the United States or the lives of the American people. And one of the reasons why I wanted to play you so much of that is so that you could hear that laid out, that vision laid out, that worldview laid out, because I think it just so vividly speaks for itself. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.